What church leaders and historians are not understanding about Matthew chapter 24. What they are not understanding is basically three things. 1. Why Matthew chapter 24 did not fulfill itself in the 1st century AD. 2. Why after 2,000 years we have not yet had the second coming of Jesus Christ. 3. Why the rapture cannot be date set. One of the most controversial debates in end-time prophecy is the idea that the second coming of Jesus Christ with rapture could be date setted. Apparently it cannot. Why? Because of what we read in Matthew chapter 24 KJV verse 36. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Because of this verse, no one can date set the second coming of Jesus Christ. But nevertheless, this has not stopped pastors and non-pastors from giving out dates of our Lord's second coming on some date in the year, month, day, and hour. From where did they, and still do, pick up such dates? Usually through some vision or dream that they had of some Jesus having told them or having visited them in a dream or vision. Sometimes it's from something having occurred or about to occur of international importance, the rumor of a war about to begin, or some natural disaster that has come, such as an earthquake or pestilence, famine, nations in war. Their followers believe these pastors and non-pastors because of their authority or the abuse of such authority over their followers, or of some personal relationship established with their followers, usually manifested through some form of cult worship of themselves. Not even 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 1 to 3 KJV is enough to prevent such people of giving out rapture dates. Verse 1, Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, and by our gathering together unto him. Verse 2, that ye be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter, as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. 3. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. But then these same pastors or others as them would say that the falling away has begun, and that the man of sin, the son of perdition, has been revealed in that person, which is some president, prime minister, king, or any individual of political, religious, economic influence, or that of a very, very rich billionaire creating his fortunes in times of political, religious, economic unrest. The problem is that though there is a falling away, and we see it all around us and everywhere, and there is no denying of this, in all its numerous manifestations, the man of sin, the son of perdition, has not been revealed. Because to have him revealed, we must first have Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, KJV. Verse 15, When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Which has its parallel with 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4, KJV. Verse 4, Who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Someone would say that this already happened, and it was in 70 AD, during the siege of Jerusalem, by which an abomination of desolation was made in the temple of Jerusalem before it being destroyed. Yes, true, but that man of sin, the son of perdition, of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, was not revealed in Titus, who led the Roman siege of Jerusalem. Because if the man of sin, the son of perdition, was revealed through Titus, then that generation of the 1st century AD would have fulfilled itself with the second coming of Jesus Christ in the 1st century AD, with Matthew chapter 24, verse 30 and 31, in the 1st century AD, at the time of the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. But because the man of sin, the son of perdition, was not revealed through Titus, the generation of the 1st century AD did not have the second coming of Jesus Christ at the time of the siege of Jerusalem. The 1st century AD generation did not have the second coming of Jesus Christ for basically two reasons. Reason number one, there was no falling away because the church was in its beginnings, but there were cults of Christianity, many of which with their false Christs and false prophets, and there were famines, pestilences and earthquakes, wars and rumors of wars, and nations rising against nations, and kingdoms against kingdoms, as written in Matthew chapter 24, from verse 4 to 8. And when it comes to verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come, which is among those verses preached by many pastors as reason and evidence that the Matthew chapter 24 generation is our generation and no previous generation to ours, because today we can say that the gospel of the kingdom is preached in all the world, and therefore referring to our generation of our present time and no other generation. But this is not true, because verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come, could instead be interpreted as the known world of the 1st century AD. Reason number two, the man of sin, son of perdition, was not revealed with Titus. Otherwise, we would have had the second coming of Jesus Christ with gathering of his church and the end of the world in the 1st century AD, as we read in Matthew chapter 24, KJV, verse 30, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And verse 31, and he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. But nevertheless, the generation of the 1st century AD was the closest in having Matthew chapter 24 fulfilled in all things written, fulfilled by historical fact, while other things and verses interpreted as having been fulfilled. What came into fulfillment in the 1st century AD from literal fact to that of interpretation was from verse 4 to 20 of Matthew chapter 24. And no other church generation came closest to fulfilling Matthew chapter 24 in all things written than that of the 1st century AD generation. Other than the 1st century AD generation, we find Matthew chapter 24 in just about every generation since Jesus Christ made this preaching, except from verse 15 to verse 20, which was of the 1st century AD generation. But because the son of perdition was not revealed through Titus, we did not have the second coming of Jesus Christ with gathering of his church in the 1st century AD. Beyond that, from verse 21 to verse 29 of Matthew chapter 24, these are unknown events in church history, especially verse 24, which would appear as an impossible event and will require a study all of its own. And something in verse 29-30, which is the topic of my soon, a frightening event signals the rapture, part 2. The 1st century AD was the generation that came closest of all church generations to having Matthew chapter 24 fulfilled in all things written in this chapter. Because of that abomination of desolation of the second temple of Jerusalem in 70 AD with destruction of Jerusalem, the end of the Jewish nation at the time, the murder of most of its inhabitants, and the exile of its people, that generation came closest to the fulfillment of Matthew chapter 24 than any generation up to this present time and generation. But because the son of perdition was not revealed through Titus, there was no second coming of Jesus Christ. Apparently, it would appear that historians, but also many church leaders, especially in Catholicism, believe that Matthew chapter 24 actually did fulfill itself in the 1st century AD. And in speaking of the second coming of Jesus Christ not having had, would mean that the second coming of Jesus Christ in that chapter and preaching must not be understood in the literal sense, but interpreted as meaning something else, and that Matthew chapter 24 must not be understood as a generation time in the literal sense, but a time span which could be even thousands of years. Reason for why after 2,000 years the church still waits the second coming of Jesus Christ, as it did in every past generation. Some even believe that Matthew chapter 24 is a failed prophecy, in the sense that though most of it fulfilled itself with the siege of Jerusalem, the rest did not, and never will, because 2,000 years have passed, and still no second coming of Jesus Christ. And at this point, there will never be the second coming of Jesus Christ. Some even believe that Jesus Christ himself made mistakes in preaching what then would become Matthew chapter 24, by confusing future events in the same generation. Whatever these so-called experts in history, and also among church leaders, are understanding, my understanding of why we do not have the second coming of Jesus Christ in the 1st century AD was because the son of perdition was not revealed through Titus. It is as simple as that. But if the son of perdition revealed itself through Titus, then we would have had the fulfillment of all remaining verses in Matthew chapter 24 with the second coming of Jesus Christ in the 1st century AD, and none of us here would have never been born. And if someone were to say, but 2,000 years have passed, how could it be possible that after 2,000 years, the second coming of Jesus Christ has not come, and this church still in wait after 2,000 years, with many even abandoning faith all through church history, and especially today abandoning believing that he will never come to rescue his church, especially from these troubled days and troubled world of our present generation? The answer to why, after 2,000 years, Jesus Christ has not come is very simple. Because something which is in this world, but not of this world, in 2,000 years, has restrained an evil by far worse than any Titus of both antiquity and modern age from revealing himself into a man, an evil that was already active since Paul began his preachings, and since then it has worked to bring the church down on its knees in the worship of this evil. But this evil never succeeded in being victorious over the church. 2,000 years of church growing and expanding all across the world, restraining and confining the mystery of lawlessness, so to keep it as a spirit, so that it would not be made visible, becoming a man, the man of sin, the son of perdition, in any generation. Church generations of good preachers and not so good preachers, good preachings and not so good preachings, saints, martyrs, blessed. That mystery of lawlessness was restrained, and still is, so not to reveal itself in any man, and in any generation. 2,000 years of wars, famines, pestilences, earthquakes, false Christs and false prophets, and nations destroyed. 2,000 years of murderers and mass murderers and genocides, church persecutions and tribulations of every kind, and in all that time a church, though sometimes weakened, but still strong, and with enough strength in it to restrain an evil far worse than anything that in the history of nations was ever witnessed. The generation of that first century AD came close to fulfill all events or things of Matthew chapter 24, but it did not. Why? That is a mystery. Not a failed prophecy, as understood from some historians, but a restraining power or a withholding of the mystery of lawlessness, a spirit from revealing itself through a man, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the beast. That mystery of lawlessness being restrained from revealing itself and becoming a man, and has been restraining this evil ever since. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 KJV verse 6. And now ye know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. Verse 7. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work, only he who now letteth will let, until he be taken out of the way. Verse 8. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. This is why Matthew chapter 24 did not fulfill itself in the first century AD, and ever since that first century AD up until now, and 2,000 years of church generations, with every generation appearing as that of Matthew chapter 24, but none having fulfilled themselves in all things written in that chapter, and preaching in one single generation. A restraining power that does not promise a prosperous life and a life without tribulation, but at least keeps away from your life something that, if not restrained, would destroy your life and the world. Matthew chapter 24 generation is not to be interpreted as a time span of an uncalculated numbers of years, centuries and thousands of years, but as a generation that is present in every generation since Jesus made this preaching, but never fulfilled itself in all things written in one single generation. All generations were Matthew chapter 24 generations, but they were all unfulfilled generations in all things preached and written, because of a restraining power present in the church, that works through the church, that operates through the church to restrain a spirit, which is Satan, to become a man. Matthew chapter 24 is not a future generation as preached and believed to be ours, beginning with the birth of modern Israel in 1948 and being a 70-80 year generation, ending somewhere around the year 2028. Matthew chapter 24 is to be understood as all generations, from when Jesus preached 2,000 years ago till his second coming, but generations that didn't fulfill themselves in all things written, in what we read in Matthew chapter 24, and the reason why this chapter we read and generation that is written does not come into fulfillment in all things written is because some restraining power that is withholding a spirit from becoming the son of perdition, revealing itself in a man. Withholding or restraining Satan, a spirit, to reveal himself in a living, breathing human being. A restraining power that will not promise a life without tribulations, but at least keep away an evil that, if unleashed or unrestrained, would destroy the world. Because if this evil would reveal itself as the man of sin and son of perdition, then it would fulfill all remaining verses of Matthew chapter 24, especially those future verses and things that the church has not witnessed before, from verse 21 to 29, that will cause the second coming of Jesus Christ to rapture his church in rescue into heaven. If Satan, a spirit, would reveal himself into the son of perdition and as a man, it would mean that the restraining power that was withholding it is no longer present, and that church by which that restraining hold was operating through is no longer serving Christ, but something else, or that the church is so weakened in its purpose that it cannot restrain the evil one from becoming a man. reason for why the church must be taken out of the world. John chapter 17 KJV, verse 15, I pray not that thou shouldest take them out of the world, but that thou shouldest keep them from the evil. But if God were not to keep away the evil, then we will have the rapture of that church alive and remaining. To answer the questions of this study, question number 1, why Matthew chapter 24 did not fulfill itself in the 1st century AD? Because the son of perdition was not revealed through Titus in Matthew chapter 24 verse 15. Question number 2, why after 2,000 years we have not yet had the second coming of Jesus Christ? Because of a restraining power that in 2,000 years has worked through the church in withholding Satan, a spirit, in becoming a man. Question number 3, why the rapture cannot be date set? Because of Matthew chapter 24 verse 36. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Which is not actually a no. It could become a yes answer, that it could be date set. But today, it is impossible to put a date on the rapture, because the son of perdition has not revealed himself, and because Satan, a spirit, is still being restrained from becoming a man. After this, maybe one could calculate the year, maybe the month, but surely not the day and hour, and not before something in Matthew chapter 24, verse 30, which is something that the Lord, our God, will do to all mankind, so to rapture his church safely up into heaven. Thank you.